And I will present that screen. Gabe, you're good to take over in a little bit, right?
To go over and
take over. Just
Yep. I got everything up.
All right. So today's topic for the Milwaukee Dev group here is developing with Salesforce CPQ. So we're going to talk about how we can use code and enhance the CPQ functionalities using some of the plugins and some of the other stuff that more or less Gabe's discovered since this time. And then we'll kind of go through some of those examples and end with a Q&A at the end there. But before we get started, I'm Jake, and Gabe is also on the call here. We both work for Penrod. Gabe, do you want to give any additional information about yourself?
Not too much. I'm a technical architect. I have experience in a lot of different Salesforce domains, and CPQ is a little bit of a newer one for me. And I've been working especially with the developer features. I'll get called in to assist with some of those features of CPQ. I am certified, bunch of different certs. I suppose most relevant to this, platform developer 2, as well as CPQ specialist. So
cool. Alrighty, and I run a training enablement at Penrod. I am CPQ certified as well. I don't do as much of the dev. I'm on the other side of the house. So. Hello, Ben. And then any announcements? This is kind of an open forum, so if there's any announcements you want to make, I would say here at Penrod, we are hiring. So if you are interested in working for us, go ahead and apply. Any other people, if they want to mention anything, go ahead and speak up, or else we'll move on. Can be if they can be announced too, like I got X and X certification, or I'm Ranger, all that other fun stuff too.
I made Ranger. I don't know when I did, but it was recent.
I think I did last week.
I'm 25 away from my 9 times Ranger. Cool. All right, then we'll just move on here. So the first thing we're going to talk about is with Salesforce CPQ, there is this thing called the external configuration. There's external configuration plugins. And it gives devs a way where we can link third-party web applications. I guess before I start, is everyone familiar with CPQ on the call? I'm making assumptions here. It's a configure price tool where you can natively use functionality to basically build out a quote, and you can put rules and product configurations and all that fun stuff in there. So what we can do is, instead of using the actual CPQ tool, we can use a third-party web application if we want that has already some of the stuff pre-built into it, take the information from that web application and feed it back into Salesforce. We can also use custom actions that can launch a URL. We'll actually, that's kind of what we have down here in this launch external. That's a button that we created. That's a custom action. And that actually launches a URL, which launches some other cool stuff. Gabe will get into some of the nitty-gritties of that, but we can launch URLs with that. We can also define the external. We can also define the external configuration in the Salesforce CPQ package settings. This all became available in CPQ Summer 17. So basically, when a rep adds or configs a product in the quote line editor, the external configure tool is launched and then is available to be used at that point instead of using some other system. So we can still use the edit lines button, and then from the actual tool, we can launch all the configurations set up from there. Some of the a little bit more deeper here, and a little deeper dive in here. We can set up external configurations to launch from a custom action. This is a non-Salesforce CPQ configurator, so similar to before, we can use that functionality. We can also set up the web application for integration, and we also can set up the integration configuration for automatic launch. So similar to what we just talked about a minute ago. If you are interested in what that looks like, there is a developer doc and everything. Similar here, you can always click any of the options in here to get more information as needed and how to set it up within your org. And my dog say hello. All right, Gabe, you want to take over?
Yeah, can you back it up a slide?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to start. We have a demo of all of these pieces we're going to be showing you here. Another piece that we're going to be showing you is the CPQ API. So what this tool enables you to do is it enables transactional level functionality using CPQ. So it's quite robust, but pretty poorly documented, unfortunately. It enables you to do quite a bit. You basically can create your own quote line editor interface, edit lines interface, completely custom using these tools that are available to you. And so you can do that within Salesforce. There's Apex mechanisms of calling this CPQ API, but there's also mechanisms that are available external to Salesforce. So if you want to, for instance, create a Heroku app that leverages CPQ for basically displaying a quote line editor and saving back to Salesforce, you can do that. You can entirely expose these transactional level commands for the CPQ service via the REST API. What we're going to be showing you today is entirely Apex driven. But I do have some thoughts on the REST API versus Apex that I can get into. So that was just a quick listing. I was kind of going off of the CPQ API documentation, just copying in everything I could see that it does. As you can see, basically, it's almost everything. One of the most valuable ones is the ability to run the calculation service, although that one is a bit hairy. And I don't have an example of that today just because of how hairy it is, but I will get into that later on in the demo. You could go to the next slide, please. So what we will be covering is 4 endpoints of the CPQ API accessed entirely through Apex. We're going to show the quote reader, which loads up a quote into your Apex, the configuration loader, which enables you to go basically query a product, but it also queries product options and other information, and it already sets it up in the format that in the JSON format that the CPQ API is expecting to be able to process those. We're going to show the product adder endpoint, which basically merges those two previous, the quote reader and the config loader together, and takes so if you think about it from the edit lines interface of CPQ, you already have a quote created, you're adding a product to it, and then maybe you're configuring that product. The quote product adder represents the step after you're done configuring that product. And then finally, saving basically represents clicking the save button in the edit lines interface. Could go on to the next slide. Okay, and then finally, I got a few extra bullets on there. Whoops. The JavaScript quote calculator plugins are available to you to, if you are running the calculation service, modify items about the way that the pricing is calculated. So sometimes you have pricing requirements that are in excess of what is available to you through CPQ. And in those instances, so a good example might be something like an external pricing service that is a web service that you need to go ping to go get the pricing from, where it's not necessarily maybe configured in CPQ. That's an example of when you might want to use the quote calculator plugin. We have a very simple example of this where we're simply hard coding a value of a price and just stamping it on all quote lines, basically. And let's see. Yeah, so it merges the two together, right? The second bullet here is basically the concept that it's not just you're overriding the pricing service entirely. You have the ability to insert in logic before the pricing service runs, after it runs, so you can kind of mesh things together. You can still price with CPQ, but then you can take those prices and then adapt them a bit further. And you could go to the next slide. So some scenarios where you might want to use the quote calculator plugin, complicated product bundling guidelines, conditional and complex pricing logic that you can't achieve, as I mentioned earlier, And then if you have situations where your pricing is just kind of too complicated, you're trying to process very large quotes with a lot of data on them, you can basically override to ensure that your transaction completes. And then just some links. So now that I guess this has to go after the let's do a demo slide, but that's fine. Well, we can rewind back to that. Okay, so what I will do is present my screen. Nice. Okay, so you all can see my Salesforce org, right? So this is a CPQ Scratch org. There is a great GitHub. I should have put it in my helpful links. There's a great GitHub repo that that I was able to find that basically puts together a CPQ environment for you with CPQ installed in it and everything kind of ready to go. That was very helpful for me. I was otherwise going to have to use like a Trailhead environment or something like that, but this was pretty clean. I was just able to spin up an org, and it was a completely fresh CPQ Scratch org environment, which was great. So this is that Scratch org I'm logged into here. We've made some configurations to it. If I go to the setup, you know, we've already gone through the kind of basic CPQ install steps. So we've already authorized the pricing service. We've created some products and set them up so that we are ready to use those in the quote line editor. And so let's just pop this open quick to show you that we've already authorized the pricing service and whatnot. And I'm pulling this up because I'm going to need to show you something right over here later on. So that's that, and let's start off then with the custom actions. So we're starting from the external configurators. So just a quick recap of the external configurators. Basically, what these enable you to do is create, the word external is there because you have the ability to use pricing and configuration interfaces that exist outside of even Salesforce. So you can port them in from a Roku app or wherever you may have them. You also can do that within Salesforce, though. There are ways of accessing this functionality from within Salesforce. There was a great Trailhead DX presentation on this that I used as the basis for this, where there's another GitHub link there. Again, I don't have it in my helpful links, and I should have added it there. But if any of you all have any questions around where some of these repos are, I could definitely direct your attention to them. And one thing I also want to do is potentially get all of this presentation up in GitHub, but I'm just not quite there yet.
When you're done with this, send me all the links, and I'll include them in the email for everyone.
Right. Excuse me. Okay, so what did we do to get external? Well, first, you're probably curious to see what it does, right? So I am in the edit lines interface for a quote here. It has no lines on it. And what we have done is we have configured a custom action here so that we've indicated we want to pop it up within the edit lines interface, and we've given it the URL of a Visualforce page. And this Visualforce page is using Lightning Out to pull in a Aura Lightning component. And inside that Aura Lightning component, we're using the Lightning Flow component to pull in a flow. And so we have this kind of inception, deeper and deeper going on into the ability to configure a complex quote situation, not necessarily using the edit lines interface. We have given ourselves the ability to take a step beyond that by even using flows to create that configuration. So we'll show you that here now. So what we've done is we've got it under the launch external label here. I was looking for ways in which this might be something where we could like change the label, but that doesn't seem to be a feature right now. So right now it's just you always get it labeled launch external. That's something I'll be looking at in the future and seeing if there's some other way we could approach that. I guess there's also a way that you can do this where the external configurator overrides the when you click the wrench icon in the configurator, so that it always pops up there, but it also gives you the ability to do it just from like basically almost a quick action here in the top row. So we're going to launch this, and what that does is it pulls up our external configurator. Now, some of this is a product of my working on this prior to this. So this is a little bit of a work in progress. But one of the things we've done here is we've just simply copied in what CPQ is giving us when we load up this external configurator service. So what they give us is a JSON object and mechanisms to both pull this out of CPQ's configuration as well as put it back. The putting it back piece didn't work particularly well for me, but it also provided a convenient mechanism with which I could demonstrate the CPQ API for you. So what you're going to see is not the external configurator mechanism of putting this configuration back and saving it. Rather, you're going to see the CPQ API method of putting the configuration back and saving it, which gives you the benefit of seeing both of those mechanisms working. This is probably a little bit messy. Let's go to a method of making it a little bit easier for you to see. So here's what this object looks like. I'll just copy this out and put it in a text. There we go. Okay, so the object we're getting out of the CPQ API service has a few attributes to it. It has this target, which basically represents a quote record. It has a quote. It has lines, it has actions, and it has this little redirect piece here. The documentation on what each of these means is very scant. And so I'm still working through, for instance, trying to figure out the differences between what the target is and what the quote is, because they seem to represent the same thing. Lines seems to make sense. You configure your lines in there, your quote lines. Actions, very scant. Little bit I found on what the redirect does, but I haven't been able to get it to do anything different than what it's doing, which is currently just basically closing down the edit lines interface. So there's some room for enhancements and growth around what we can do with this when we try to save it back. Let's take a look at what we have right now in the edit lines interface for using a flow in here. So we have a flow set up in a Lightning Flow component here at the bottom of this component. So I'll pop this back up so you can see this a little bit easier. The first screen of this flow is merely taking what we've done here. We've passed in the JSON object that CPQ has given us in the external configurator. So the entire object we've made available within the flow. So we made it an Apex defined object and passed it into the flow. Might help at this point if I start showing you some of this code. So let's dive into that. So the Visualforce page I was talking about is here, this external config page. So this is what we told CPQ to load in that custom action. And we told it to do it by the URL. There's some pieces here that are required by the CPQ API service. You see that we're importing in this EasyXDM package. That enables that communication between the component in the front end and CPQ in the back end. And then we have just some JavaScript scripts here for loading up the configuration and then saving the configuration. as I mentioned earlier, the saving piece isn't working particularly well right now. But loading it up does work. And so what we are doing is we're loading in the quote, and that gives us the quote ID. If we have any products configured, it tells us what those products are. And so we've loaded in this quote, and you see that it posts the message to us here. And we receive that message. And then we use Lightning Out to load in our both our Aura app as well as the component we want to inject into the app. And by the way, all these are all credit due to the folks that prepared this Trailhead presentation. I'm really just kind of building off of what they did, and there's a great YouTube video about that. And so the component is loaded, and then we are adding a event handler to it. What this does is it enables us to basically close down. So this enables us to pop an event back up to the Visualforce page saying we're done. You can see that it's calling broadcast here, which is this function that closes the whole process up and tries to save the quote. Let's take a look at this xconfig Aura component and see what that's doing. So here you see that it has an attribute taking that config string, that JSON string that is being injected in from the Visualforce page. We have our event handler for that config event that we saw earlier, and then we have an initialization handler. We have the piece at the top of the component that's simply showing us that raw configuration. And we also have our Lightning flow that is showing us what is in our flow. And let's take a look at the controller for this. The initialization function, what this is doing is it's finding the flow, reading in the configuration data, parsing that configuration data. I had to do a little bit of hacking of it because it didn't like some of these pieces I was trying to give it. So I chopped off some of the nodes of the object, but it's still usable within the flow, almost all of it. And then I am taking an Apex-defined object, and I am providing that to the flow. So this is taking this whole piece of configuration and providing it to the flow for use. And then I'm starting that flow. Let's take a quick look at the defined Apex. I think it's this one. Yes. So this is the Apex defined object. You can see here, and this is just a little bit of a piece about what you can do with flows. And when you're launching a flow using a Lightning component, you have the ability to define this, and you'll notice that it's a lot like a Lightning component. You're defining these as Aura-enabled attributes, and that makes them available to screen flows when you indicate it as Aura-enabled. And so that loads up the flow. And our flow, I don't know, Jake, if you want to talk about the flow, I think I can. You did a lot more of this, but I'll pull up the flow we have here.
Yeah, I can talk about it. It's not crazy by any means. Essentially, all we're doing is selecting a product and then getting the options for that particular product. So that's the first screen that you're on. So we'll do what we do is we go do a query to find the available products that aren't components, and then we return them. You select one of them, and then we do another get records there to find the options. I loop through those options just to see. To present each of the IDs to each of the product options to the user. Basically to say, would you like to add this to the package? It's got a picture of it, and they have the option to add. And if they add, we have it to a collection. If I don't, we just circle back the loop until we're done. And then when we're done, then we have a collection of records, and we say, thanks for creating your records, that type of thing. we all the images and everything, we pull that from the product information. So I just created some rich text fields and stuff like that. This looks, I mean, it's not complex by any means. It's pretty simple. So I think showing it probably will add more value than just looking at description.
Yeah, so let's take a look at what that's doing. This is the first screen of the flow that you saw. So that's this piece over back up top here. And it's showing, so you see here, this is that Apex defined object, the Apex var, where I'm pulling the target ID. So that's the target quote, and I'm getting the ID off of it. So that's what's being displayed here is just an example that I can pull those pieces out of the JSON configuration and display them within the flow.
Right. You probably wouldn't have this particular page in a flow like this.
Correct.
Yeah. That we can get the data in there.
Yeah. What we're showing here is that you do have the ability to, in your flow, utilize the data provided by CPQ for these external configurators.
Yeah, as of now, that it's pulled in the quote ID.
Yep. Any questions so far? Okay.
Oh, cool.
Let's keep going. All right. So as Jake mentioned, we're providing like a mini product search here. So this basically mimics what you do in CPQ when you're adding a product, where you have the product search available to you and you're selecting that parent product where you have product options related to that. So what we have is some product options configured for this medical cart parent product.
Yep.
And when we perform this selection, the system goes through the flow and it says, well, what product options do we have available to us? And then it loops through those. So on this particular medical cart product, there are 3 options available. This MC computer stand, so I'll add that to my cart. I can do a power supply. I'll add that one. And then I also can add wheels. I'm not going to add that one. Okay, so now we finished our loop. We're on that thanks page. Just to allow you to see it, these are product options, product option IDs that are flow variables. One thing that is happening or will happen here with how we have used the Lightning Flow component to display this, Lightning Flow enables you, the Lightning Flow component in Aura Components enables you to basically set a callback. So when statuses change in a flow, such as moving from running through the flow to we've finished the flow, you have the ability to post a callback back to that component and use variables available within that flow to process. So this list of product option IDs is quite valuable to us because what I'm going to do in the code of the Lightning component is send that up to my Apex controller and tell the Apex controller, I want you to use this option configuration to save this quote, to configure and save this quote. And it's going to use the CPQ API to perform that process. So when I click finish here, I want to change that a little bit and add like another spinner on there. But so this has should have saved those. Let's take a look here. Great. So now, as opposed to before when there was nothing here, now we have a fully configured line for that medical cart. So we have accessories selected, those first 2 accessories. I selected the stand and the power supply, and I did not select the wheels. And it configured those for me. Anything, you really have a lot of power, especially with the CPQ API. When I get into that, you really, anything on this particular view, configure products view, is available to you, even to the level of product rules where certain things get hidden under certain circumstances. There are CPQ API endpoints for that. So it's quite powerful in what it is able to do for you. I'm not using any of those particular ones where I'm checking the product rule configuration or anything like that. I'm just using reading the quote, getting the parent product configuration possibilities, configuring it and saving it. So let's take a look at how that saving process is working. So I mentioned to you that there was that callback, that when I went to finished, the system started taking my configuration of product options and performing some tasks with that. So that goes into this handle status change method here. So we're past the initialization where we started the flow, and now we're into handle status change. So handle status change provides you any of the information you want in the event parameter. So that's how the flow service is getting back to your Lightning service. So you retrieve those from the event parameters using this event.getParam. And so this is how I'm getting the output variables. That includes that selected product options piece from the flow. I'm checking this event getParam status to see if I've reached that finished stage. So have I clicked the finished button on the flow? Once I have done that, the system is saying, okay, you must be ready to save at this time. And so I start performing some logic on that. I instantiate an empty list of selected product options. I'm iterating through all of the output variables because it gives them to me in a list. And I'm checking the names of those to see if it's the name that I want. So the name that I want is called selected products. And then I'm iterating through those selected products, and I'm stashing the IDs of those into this selected product options list. Then I am, this is something funny I had to do to get it working because it didn't like it when I had an empty actions list when I tried to use the broadcast method to push this back in the external configurator. So I just stuffed I don't even know if this does anything, just a dummy value in there so that it wouldn't error out. And then I am using this helper send config data method to take my selected product options and use the CPQ API to process those. So let's take a look at what that helper is doing. Send config data. The first thing I'm doing is saving the product options. And saving the product options is a method right down here where I am calling an Apex method and giving it some parameters. The parameters that I'm providing it are two things. I'm providing it our selected product option IDs, as I already acquired earlier out of the flow. And then the other piece that I am taking is the quote ID, and this is coming from the configuration object provided to us from the external configurator service. Passed down into us. So these are the two parameters that I am using in the Apex to perform my CPQ API processing on this. So I'm calling a method there on my Apex controller called commit product options, and I'm sending those parameters to it. Let's take a look at what that controller is doing. So commit product options. Again, my list of product option IDs and my quote ID. Here's where we get into the CPQ API goodness here. So some hard-coded values here. Don't worry about that. That is merely the product ID of the medical cart. An enhancement would be getting that out of the flow variables. So this is how you call the CPQ API. You can see here that this is a namespace on the Apex class. So these are global Apex classes that are available for you to call and use when you are using the CPQ API. So the first one is it's this service router, and there's this read method on it, where I can submit it, basically the name of the endpoint that I want it to call, which is the quote reader. And I'm submitting to it a parameter, which is my quote ID. And again, that's coming out of the CPQ external configurator service. So when I call this and give it the quote ID, it gives me a JSON object representing the quote. And this is in the form of a CPQ API quote model. And these quote models I've defined in a plain old Java object here. Again, credit to someone else because I got this off of GitHub. There is, this is basically a definition of all possible objects out of this API. And the quote model, it would help if I did this. There we go. Quote model has representation of an S object quote. It has quote line models and quote line group models related to it, and then a bunch of these kind of configuration parameters. I don't know, there's so much here to this. And honestly, what I will tell you is if you kind of start playing around with this and getting good at it, it helps you understand CPQ better because you're really understanding how it's processing these things at the transactional level. Instead of trying to like figure out how the data model works when playing with the interface or using edit lines. I definitely feel like this kind of opens up a new way of understanding how CPQ does its processing of configuration and pricing and quoting. Any questions here about these definitions of the JSON from the CPQ API? Okay, let's keep going. So the next piece we're loading in this config loader endpoint on the CPQ API. What this does is it gives us a product structure. So that's also defined in my product models over here. If I go to the product model, here it is, which has a product 2 record on it. And most valuable for us is this configuration model. And this is what you're going to see me playing around with a little bit later is the configuration model. The configuration model enables you to configure. So you're playing around with product options and you're deciding which ones you want on the order. So that's the one we're going to be working with next. So I retrieve this configuration for a product, the parent product, which is the medical cart. And then I'm playing around with the data within it. So I mentioned to you earlier that configuration model. Basically, what I'm doing here, and this is just something I had to do to make sure this processing worked, I'm cloning this product configuration. So you see that I'm deserializing it within a for loop. This is one thing I had to do playing around with this. There might be a better way to do it. Perhaps only deserializing the configuration model would probably be a good idea. But you do need to clone this each time because what you need is a fresh record so that you can save that fresh record back rather than it has to do with pointers in your memory. So instead of getting a pointer to one that's on your old configuration model, you need a new fresh one and you plug those in. Just a little bit of a tricky thing I had to play around with. So get a fresh configuration model each time so that you can build a list out of those and plug those in to your new configuration model that you want to save. So what you do is what we're doing here is we're iterating through all of the possible options of the parent product, and then we're checking to see if the product options that we sent in from the Lightning component, from the flow, contains the ID of this configuration option model under consideration. So of all the options relating to a product, we check each of them to see if we have selected those in our flow. And if we have, we're saying, okay, good, let's add this to our quote. Let's add it as a configuration of this product. And so we add it to our list. And then we save that list into this option configurations attribute of the configuration model of the product. So it's this piece right here, whereas this is where the magic happens with using the CPQ API to configure a product that you're adding to a quote. This configuration.option configurations, when you mess around with it and then save it back in using the add products context and then saving the quote, that's how we're doing this magic piece of automatically setting up the quote so that when we load it back up into the edit lines interface, CPQ already knows how to perform all this. The alternate option could be, right, you just try to save the quote lines directly. And I'm sure a lot of people try to do it that way. I certainly have. But that's tricky, right? Trying to just manually do a DML or a flow manipulation of the quote lines comes with unpredictable behavior. Sometimes it doesn't run the calculation service when you do that. So you get kind of like red looking scary errors on your quotes. And using this CPQ API to add your products and save your quote really ensures that you're doing it the CPQ way, as if you had configured it within the edit lines interface. So that's the final steps that we're doing here. We're adding this product to our quote, and then we're saving the quote. So we're adding it to the virtual model that we have. So this doesn't actually save it yet. It doesn't save until we use the quote saver. Any questions about that CPQ API piece? Again, love to send you code samples. This is actually a combination of the Salesforce documentation, and this is my little magic piece here. This one took me several days to figure out that it was this particular attribute that I needed to configure in order to make everything work. Okay, so now we've covered the CPQ API and we've touched on the external configurator. Let's take a look at one final piece that you can use to edit, develop using CPQ. So what I have done is I've added a quote calculator plugin. And quote calculator plugins are stored in this custom scripts object. There's kind of two different ways you can do it. There's a legacy way where you reference an Apex class, and then there's this new way that uses JavaScript. Definitely recommend looking into the JavaScript mechanism because it's a lot more robust. I think it uses ES6, so it's pretty modern JavaScript that you have available to you to perform these. It's also faster. And so what you do is you use this S object, the custom scripts object. You create a record and you actually write your code into a long text field here. So all I've done is just call this hacking pricing. And you say to the service what fields you're going to want to use. So I indicated that I want to manipulate the price of the quote line. And so in my function here, on after calculate, I receive from the quote calculator service, the quote model, the quote line models, and then this connection object. When you receive these parameters, if you make changes to them, CPQ automatically recognizes that and changes its pricing accordingly. It will change the quote lines as a result of that. And these method names are standardized. So you want to make sure that you're looking at what method names are available to you. There's a lot of them, and I'm just using one of these as an example on after calculate, which basically means after the CPQ calculation service is finished working through all of its pricing activities, I want to then take another pass at it and make changes to it that I want to make to it. And the changes that I'm making to it are simply overriding whatever CPQ has said for the list price that has been calculated and pushing it up to 1,000. And then I'm resolving the promise and sending that back over to CPQ and saying, here you go, this is what I want to do with the quote lines. So what that means is that when I run this calculator here, my list prices are going to be changed. So I run it, and there you see that it has. My list prices have all jumped to 1,000, and the pricing service is still changing some of these, so not everything has changed here, but you do see that the list prices have been modified from the calculator service. One way that you configure that as I mentioned earlier, you go to the settings in CPQ. So that's in the installed packages of the setup. You click into configure for Salesforce CPQ and you get this interface here. And on the plugins tab, you have the ability to specify by name the custom script record that you have your JavaScript stored on. So the legacy calculator configuration is here. I don't have it checked because I want to use these modern plugins, these new JavaScript plugins. And I've indicated by name that I want to use the hack pricing plugin. If I took this out and saved my configuration and then reran the calculation, it would use the list prices from the products from those price books. And that is pretty much it for what we have here today. Again, thanks to, we all stand on the shoulders of giants. I've received some great help from what I've been able to find online. So if anyone comes across this in the future and sees me building on their work, I want to thank them for that, because it's always, this development is an iterative process, and you really need to build on what you've seen before. So that's my piece there, and hopefully you all have gotten some inspiration from this, and you too can take this and build it and take it up another step further. I myself know that there's a lot of different directions I want to take this specific presentation to kind of iterate it, take it a few steps further, because as you've probably seen, there's a sort of a broad spectrum of things that you can do with development in CPQ. When you're launching an external component, you can use a Lightning component. If you're using a Heroku service, you can write it in React if you want and pull it in here. The sky's really kind of the limit, and you really have the ability to tweak this edit lines interface so that you're getting the configuration experience to your users and customers that they want to have. And then for the CPQ API piece, you have the ability to just tear this all up and not even use edit lines, really, because you have all of the tools available to you in this interface at a transactional level. And then finally, the pricing service you have available to you as a method of tweaking the way that CPQ is running its pricing algorithms prior to committing those to the records. So with that said, I will bring us back to our presentation here, and let's see if, I'll show the helpful links. This is the YouTube link. So this one's great. This is the Trailhead presentation on the external configurators. This is a great Apereo link on using QCP in Salesforce. And then a lot of the CPQ API stuff was actually my research, so I didn't give you a link for that.
Thank you for that, Gabe.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. So just some future sites and insights of how you could use this. Like you said, using a Lightning Web Component where we could do things that it's more graphical interface. So you could build something on the fly and then use that as your interface, and then take all the parts that they put into that visual conception and then feed that back into CPQ. So you can really the sky's the limit of what you want to do, and you can customize any application that you want, and then you tie everything back into CPQ. So if you have a really complex current configuration tool that you want to use, you can actually tie that into CPQ, use the configuration tool in the other system, and push it back into here. Any other questions? All right. Gabe, anything else you want to add?
No, I don't think so. But stay in touch with us. We're both on Twitter, and if anyone creates any cool things using CPQ development features, we would love to hear about them. We're all ears.
All right, cool. Thanks for coming, everyone, and I'll see you next month, hopefully.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, guys.